Let's talk about sex, podcast people, with Dan Savage on the Savage Lovecast. Okay, so this video is gonna be a little bit different from my normal fare because first of all, I'm gonna recommend you listen to the Savage Lovecast as a show, and I'm not gonna be talking about any particular episode too much. If you don't know who Dan Savage is, he is a love and relationship advice expert. And just a normal guy who lives with his husband in Seattle. One of the things he always says about advice is that you don't really have to be an expert advice. If you look up the word advice in the dictionary, it's just kind of one person giving their ideas on what would be a good action to another person. So obviously take everything with a grain of salt. But I find Dan's perspective really interesting because he's been in this advice business for over 20 years now. I believe it just started with a advice column back in a newspaper once upon a time, you know, way back in the day before there was such a thing as podcasts. Over those 20 years, Dan Savage has really refined his views, refined his advice, and his craft in giving people really good actionable steps that they can take to improve their relationships, have a better love life, have better communication, and really live happier lives. A word of warning about this show, obviously it is very X-rated, it's very explicit. That's part of what is so entertaining about this show is, let's just say this show is very BDSM and kink friendly and gay friendly, of course, everything LGBT, QIAA, whatever thrown in there. But I often find myself saying, what would Dan do in this situation? In my own personal life, in my own love life, I think, what if I were to call Dan's show, what would he say? And he generally has really good sage advice that I think helps people from getting into the wrong relationships, learning how they can exit uncomfortable situations, things like that. For example, one of the things that Dan is known for is the GGG philosophy, which is good, giving, and game, which really just states that a ideal partner, a good partner, the kind you want to be with is good, meaning they possess a certain skill set, and that they are actually trying to make an effort to be good in bed in the sack, giving, and that they're giving, they're not a taker. If you were, I mean, you don't want to get into a situation where you're sort of trading orgasm for orgasm, but they are perhaps going to be giving more than 50%. And game, meaning that, you know, you're pretty much just like game for whatever. I mean, not anything, not too crazy, but you might be flexible, I think is the right word to try new things and experiment so long as it doesn't push you too far out of your comfort zone. One of the ways he describes this is that if you are crying in the fetal position the next day, then okay, I think you've gone a little bit too far. But I think there is certainly some usefulness in getting out of your comfort zone a little bit. My one criticism of the show, and also one of my favorite things, is honestly Dan Savage's opening political rants. Because sometimes the opening rant is the most entertaining and the most fun part of the show because he touches on current events and politics that are happening at the time of its recording, but at the same time, because Dan Savage is so liberal and lefty, you know, he's definitely kind of like a Bernie Sanders kind of guy, is that I feel like he is alienating the people who honestly need his advice the most. It's great when Dan is weighing in on things like HIV and sex workers and pornography in our society. But when he starts veering into talking about, I don't know, guns and healthcare and Trump and this, that, and the other, when these things aren't related to relationships and sexuality, you know, I feel like it's alienating some potential viewers. So this is kind of an interesting way to think about audience building, is Dan is being very true and authentic to himself and not censoring himself and being who he is and speaking his truth to the world. So I think that's part of the reason he's built such a devoted following. But on the other hand, I can't help but wonder if maybe his advice could be helping more people. So particularly if you are the kind of person who would get turned off by a gay man talking about how we need more gun restrictions in America, it's all the more reason for you to listen to this podcast, so that you'll get a greater perspective from another point of view, and you'll hear real everyday people calling in and struggling through relationship problems that you might find relevant to your life. So hey, I highly recommend the Savage Lovecast with Dan Savage. It is one of the only podcasts, I'll admit, that I have financially supported. If you subscribe to the Magnum edition of the Savage Lovecast, it's twice as long and no ads, which is really nice. So hey, take the free version, they call it the micro version, for a spin, and I'd love to see you guys supporting the show. All right, podcast people, keep your earbuds in, and I'll catch you on the next episode.